Hi there, it's Mr. Clark. Welcome to lesson MED.5.3 on Musica Ficta. Before we get into this, I want to emphasize that this is an area of significant scholarly contention and debate, so I'm trying to kind of thread the middle of the road presenting this, but if this is something you're interested in, there are lots of arguments out there that you can get into. So, when you use notes that are in the Guidonian hand, or the gamut, this was known as musica vera, musica recta, or musica regularis. True music, correct music, regular music. And then if you use notes that were outside the hand, that did not appear on the hand, then that was known as musica falsa, or more commonly musica ficta. False music or feigned music. The term ficta might have come from the fact that these are based on imaginary transpositions of the hexachord. Remember, there are only 3 valid transpositions of the hexachord, starting on C, F, and G. Or because when you're using notes that made the solmization kind of funky. So, strictly speaking, musica ficta would, in this sense, would be any note that's not in the diatonic C major scale or B flat, because you're allowed to use B flat because that's part of the F hexachord that's still in the hand. You can still use that. But any other note, any other accidental would be considered musica ficta. In the modern sense, musica ficta would be any accidental that is not notated in the original manuscript. So the characterization of B flat, depending on which definition you're using, outside the hand or unnotated accidental, depending on the definition, B flat might be considered musica ficta under the second, but not the first. But these musica ficta notes, these notes outside the hand, weren't notated most of the time because the performers were assumed to be smart enough to be able to hear and be like, oh, that's of course what the composer wanted. Which is a problem now because we don't know what composers from, 800 years ago wanted. So, as modern scholars, we're left to try to recreate these rules from existing treatises and try to figure out our best how to apply them and what situations make sense to apply them in. Because if you have rules from the 1300s that apply to music from the 1100s, so you can see where the scholarly contention and debate gets in. So, there were 2 main reasons that musica ficta would be invoked. First, for the sake of beauty, causa pulchritudinis, which primarily applies from late 1200s forward. So, and the principle here was that when a third goes to a fifth, or a sixth goes to an octave, they should be major. So if you had a written A natural, C natural going out to a fifth, then we would assume that we would want it to be major to get that half step up top, or to get that half step down on the bottom. So at least one of the voices is moving by half step, whether you want that double leading tone flavor or that Phrygian flavor. Same thing with sixths. And this would definitely be true at cadences, not necessarily at other points in phrases, but maybe. And then when a third goes to a unison or to a lower fifth, it must be minor. So here we have a third going to a unison. If it's F and A, that's a major third. Not super strong, but we could put that half step up top or on the bottom. And then this is what they mean by a lower fifth, where that top voice is still moving by half step and then the lower voice jumps down. So when you apply these rules, you get, like I was saying, a double leading tone or a Phrygian cadence. So as a result of these rules, if you have any of these progressions in an upper voice at a cadence, you're probably going to have a sharp on the lower note because you want that half step motion. So re, ut, re would normally be a whole step. We would probably assume a sharp there. Re, ut, re. Even though that wouldn't normally be a half step. So same applies. Sol, fa, sol, la, sol, la, mi, re, mi. I'm sorry, not mi, re, mi. That would not usually add a sharp. That would usually be the top voice of a Phrygian cadence. So the half step, if we're in a C hexachord, that would be E, D, E up top, you could harmonize that with sixths, and then the half step would be in that lower sixth going out to an octave and getting your Phrygian cadence. So that even though this is termed for the sake of beauty, it's not optional. Everyone was assumed to have the same taste of beauty as the composer. You got to do it from the late 1200s forwards, at least at cadence points. Again, scholarly contention and debate. So the other main reason, brushing all that aside, is for the sake of necessity. So harmonic intervals of an augmented unison, an augmented octave, a diminished octave, and a diminished fifth must be corrected to their perfect counterparts. Notice it's only diminished fifth, it's not augmented fourth, because a perfect fourth was also sometimes considered a dissonant. So going from an augmented fourth to a perfect fourth didn't really help you out that much. So if you have an augmented unison, it's like, nah, make it right. Diminished octave, make it right. Augmented octave, make it right. Diminished fifth, make it right. And in this case, the lower note of most of these is moving. In this case, the upper voice is moving. But determining which note that you need to move will probably require to look at the context around, seeing which note makes more sense to shift. So most often, you'll change a note that is solmized as mi to a note sung as fa. This would change, probably add a flat or remove a sharp, as we understand it today. You don't need to worry about this in melodic intervals, unless you're super early dealing with Gregorian chant monophonic business. But usually not a huge deal for melodic intervals. We're just considering these dissonances as harmonic intervals. So there are some handy Latin phrases that can help you remember how to apply these with common specific instances. So there's the saying, mi contra fa est diabolus in musica. And if you speak Latin, clearly you know that that means mi against fa is the devil in music. Which is where you may have heard that the tritone is known as the devil in music. That's where that saying comes from. So this applied to vertical intervals as well as close placement and horizontal lines. So another instance is that una nota super la semper est canendum fa. Very nice metric rhyming, must be true. One note above la is always sung fa. So here we have a C hexachord, re, fa, sol, la, then one note above fa, and then it goes back down, la, sol, mi, ut, re, mi, and this is Greensleeves. So if you just play it as written, as notated, re, fa, sol, la, 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 sol, mi, ut, re, mi. But if you take una nota super la, semper est canendum fa, then we have to sing that note as fa, which would put it in an F hexachord, which would make it a B flat. Re, fa, sol, la, fa, la, sol, mi, ut, re, mi. So that's why today, sometimes you see Greensleeves with a B flat here, like a natural minor sort of Aeolian sound. Sometimes you see it with a B natural here, which is more of a Dorian sound. Fun facts from medieval music theory. So some further notes. If the two things appear to be in conflict, causa pulchritudinis and causa necessitatis, favor beauty over necessity. Turns out necessitatis isn't that necessary as long as it's beautiful. So here we have an example. And as written without an accidental, it's going to sound like this. Okay, sure. So here we're going to look at the C sharp. We see a sixth going out to an octave and say, okay, causa pulchritudinis, that's got to be a major sixth. But then that causes an augmented fifth, causa necessitatis, but here beauty triumphs over necessity, and we keep it as a C sharp. Which might sound a little dissonant and funky to our modern ears, but that is our understanding of what medieval musicians would have expected. So some notes from manuscripts. If you're dealing with original manuscripts, accidentals would only affect a single note. That whole going through the entire bar line thing doesn't apply at this point in history, and doesn't imply a change of key. Trust the rules over the notation. Scribes in the medieval era were notoriously bad at transcribing accidentals. The scribes were rarely musicians themselves, and sometimes would just kind of put them in the wrong place. Not great. And sometimes there aren't any good solutions. So here's an example from Jacopo da Bologna, Achille Altera. So we're in 3 voices here. So I'll play it as written with no accidentals. Then we'll work through it together. So, one more time. All right. So all 4 sources that we have for this piece give this note as a C sharp. This is causa pulchritudinus because we have C sharp, and then it's implied it goes up to a D, although it doesn't actually do so until here, with the tenor. So we have C sharp, our major 6th going out to an implied octave. So now, from the beginning, we have so should we also raise the C sharp back here, or is that far enough away? That makes I'm sorry. Should we raise this G sharp here is what we're asking, because that would give you a double leading tone cadence. That makes sense. So 3rd out to 5th, sure. That would be causa pulchritudinus. So now we're going to look back at measure 36. So here we have a C sharp back here. Should we also make that a C sharp, or should we say? That's a little funky. So possibly we could do that, although it would form a tritone there. And the tenor doesn't resolve downward, so there's not a huge reason to do this. There's no reason for pulchritudinus, and it violates necessitatis, because that would be creating an augmented interval. So if we make that a G sharp there, should we also make this a G sharp? Probably not, because then you have an augmented 2nd going from the G sharp to the F back to the G sharp. That's not great. Okay, so what if we made that an F sharp? Now we have an augmented octave with the 10. Oh, no. So it's probably best to just leave that and keep the C sharp that's in all the manuscripts. Again, no great solutions here, but this is the sort of thinking that you have to do when you're thinking through, does it apply here? Do we need Musica Ficta? So in modern editions, if you see an editor adding Musica Ficta, typically you won't see it next to the note head right here. You'll see it written above so that you know it's an editorial edition. So that's often but not always true. So if you're not sure, check your edition to see. They should tell you how the editor has indicated ficta, whether it's in line or whether it's above the notes. So take a deep breath, causa pulchritudinus, causa necessitatis, internalize those and apply them as best you can, and then feel free to get into arguments with medieval music scholars. See you next time.